I'm honored to speak with you about an issue that is facing everyone on Earth, no matter who you are, where you live, what language you speak, whether you're young or old, tall or short, the president of a country, the chairman of a company, or a newborn child. We're all in this together. And that issue is climate change, the climate crisis, and it is closely related to the loss of the fabric of life that has shaped Earth's rocks and water into the miraculous living system that has developed over billions of years, now seriously degraded through human actions, mostly in the past 200 years. Water is the key to life. Water is the key to climate. And 97% of Earth's water and 97% of the biosphere is ocean. It's taken time for climate scientists to recognize the inextricable connection between the atmosphere and the ocean, between climate and the ocean, between Earth's living systems and climate. Now, in the 21st century, we know that the climate crisis is an ocean crisis. The film that follows helps explain the nature of the ocean and how it is connected to climate and to all of life on Earth, human life very much included. From afar, the world is blue, with an all-encompassing ocean, the source of all life. Without the ocean, Earth would be as bleak, as barren, as Mars or the Moon. With every drop of water you drink, every breath you take, you're connected to the sea, no matter where on Earth you live. Life in the sea generates about 70% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. It absorbs much of the carbon dioxide. The ocean drives climate and weather, regulates and stabilizes temperature, shapes Earth's chemistry. Water evaporates from the surface of the sea, forms clouds that return water to land and sea as rain, sleet, and snow. The ocean covers nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface, but that's just the surface. The average depth is 4 kilometers. The maximum 11 kilometers, 7 miles down. "97% of Earth's water is ocean." It should be no surprise that 97% of Earth's living space is ocean space. The greatest abundance and diversity of life is there, with forms that represent nearly all of the major categories of plants, animals, and microbes that exist on Earth. Life abounds even at the greatest depth, where the pressure is more than 1,000 times greater than at the surface. Diving into the sea is like diving into the history of life on Earth, where creatures precede humankind by hundreds of millions of years. It's a vast liquid realm where diaphanous creatures thrive: jellies, squids, silvery fish. Creatures that illuminate the deep sea darkness with their own living light. terrain below holds most of the world's mountains, entire chains of peaks that run down the major ocean basins like giant backbones. Most of the planet's volcanoes are in the sea, many forming the underpinnings of islands such as Hawaii, the Galapagos, Iceland, and thousands of others. With new technologies, submarines, ships, satellites, we've discovered more about the ocean in the past half-century than during all preceding history. Yet most of the ocean, about 95%, has yet to be seen by human eyes, let alone explored. Far into the 20th century, people thought that the sea was infinite in its capacity to yield whatever we wanted to take from it, and accept whatever we disposed of there. Over the years, hundreds of millions of tons of ocean wildlife have been extracted, and hundreds of millions of tons of noxious waste have been put into the sea. Industrial fishing has depleted fish and other ocean wildlife, some nearly to extinction. Many large and even small species of creatures have declined by more than 90% in half a century. Trawls and nets scrape the seafloor to catch shrimp and bottom-dwelling fish, scallops and oysters. They're the equivalent of using bulldozers to catch songbirds and squirrels. Pollutants from agriculture, industrial waste, and sewage have seeped into the ocean, accumulating in marine organisms, even in the icy waters of the Arctic and the Antarctic. More than 300 dead zones now darken coastal areas worldwide. Plastic debris is dumped in such quantities that a huge floating mass of garbage twice the size of Texas has formed in the Pacific, and plastic clogs the shores of even remote Pacific islands. The construction of coastal cities has brought about the loss of coral reefs, mangrove forests, and vast wetlands, and the birds and marine life that once thrived there. Recent changes in the ocean are compounding the impacts of global warming. And in turn, climate change, increasing sea level, and acidification are altering the nature of the ocean. Now we know. One of the great discoveries of our time is that there are limits to what we can take out and what we can put in without dire consequences to the nature of the ocean, and thus to the underpinnings of what makes life possible for us. Now that we know, we can do what it takes to reverse the troubling trends, to treat the ocean as if our lives depend on it. Because they do. As a scientist and an explorer, during more than 50 years of immersing myself in the sea, as an oceanographer, diving for thousands of hours, living in underwater laboratories, learning to use equipment to extend time and depth under the sea, using more than 30 different kinds of submarines. I have witnessed an era of unprecedented discovery, and I witnessed a time of unprecedented loss. We've learned more and lost more since the middle of the 20th century than during all preceding history. Burning oil, gas, and coal to power our growing civilization is part of the problem, and part of the solution clearly means developing alternatives that do not cause the planet to grow warmer and do not change planetary chemistry, do not pollute the air and water or cause the ocean to become more acidic. Everything that all of us care about, health, wealth, security, our very existence, all of that really depends on maintaining the habitability of the planet, the miraculous living blue planet that is alone in the universe as a place suitable for our existence. And lucky us, we can still breathe the air. Rain falls from the sky. There's still birds and butterflies and trees and ferns. There's still fish, whales, and coral reefs. We can still shift from planetary decline to recovery if we recognize the danger we're in and act swiftly to restore health to the living systems that make our existence possible. Recently, I met the astronaut William Anders, who took this iconic image of Earth from space called Earthrise. And he told me that as important as that photograph is, his favorite view shows Earth's blue face, the Pacific Ocean. However, there's clear evidence that our actions are rapidly degrading systems, the Earth's natural built-in life support system, the mostly blue ocean systems that govern the generation of oxygen, the capture of carbon dioxide, the flow of energy, the symphony of life here that is unique in the universe. There may be life elsewhere, but nowhere else are there elephants and ants, rainforests, or golf courses for that matter, libraries, and orchestras, cities where humans dwell. Our past, our present, and whatever our future will be are all here, and all now are at risk. That's the bad news. But the good news is that we know the problems exist, and we also know we have the power to take action, to reverse the decline, to achieve a vital turning point, to avoid reaching the dreaded tipping points that are fast approaching. The key to addressing climate change is knowing that the problems exist. Imagine if we did not know the consequences of illuminating the world with coal, oil, and gas, or that we must become more efficient about commerce, aware of the climate costs of shipping 90% of everything with large disruptive noise-producing CO2-emitting megaships that did not and could not exist 100 years ago. We can measure the impact of warming on the decline of polar ice in the Arctic, with consequences to polar bears, and in Antarctica, with consequences to penguins and other forms of life. We can also see consequences to people who live on islands and along coasts as sea level rises and storms become more intense and more frequent. Prolonged periods of warming cause coral reefs to lose their symbiotic algae, often followed by death. As a witness, exploring the ocean and diving on coral reefs globally for more than 60 years, living in underwater laboratories, using deep diving submarines, I've been shocked and saddened by the collapse of once healthy, vibrant systems. Now we know saving and restoring forests can help stabilize climate. Attention is now being given to the forests in the sea, mangroves, marshes, seagrass meadows. Forests of kelp that dwell in cold, temperate seas, and even in Arctic and Antarctic waters. And most importantly, the small but enormously abundant microforests of phytoplankton, legions of photosynthetic organisms that capture carbon, generate food, and release oxygen into the atmosphere and the ocean. The most abundant and diverse forms of life on Earth are in the zooplankton that dine on the tiny photosynthesizers and in turn become food for small fish and then larger fish that are consumed by larger fish. Sometimes with flashing fins, scales, and even feathers, with birds diving on the schools of small fish from above, and sharks, tunas, and dolphins feasting from below. This is the carbon cycle in action. This impacts the climate as carbon dioxide from the atmosphere translates through the food chain into large animals that hold the carbon in place until they eventually sink into the ocean's depths, where carbon is stored for millennia. Taking fish and other sea animals out of the ocean breaks the links and puts carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, similar to clear-cutting forests or burning trees. The International Monetary Fund commissioned a study on the carbon value of whales alive to be worth $1 trillion with respect to climate stability. Not only do they hold carbon, they also put nutrients back into the sea that in turn fertilizes the phytoplankton that captures CO2 from the atmosphere and releases oxygen as a byproduct. If that makes sense for whales, it must also be true for fish, large and small. Every one, like every tree, living carbon. Every animal gives nutrients back to the system, driving the intricate living give and take that makes Earth different from, say, the Moon or Mars or Jupiter. Killing sharks for their fins or food or sport, or killing whales for meat and bone and oil by extracting hundreds of millions of tons of wild fish and other sea life, from shrimp to squid. We have altered the nature of the sea in just a few decades. This is not about fishermen taking a few fish for their families and communities for sustenance. This is industrial killing of wildlife at a scale and with speed, mostly since the 1970s, that far exceeds the capacity of the animals to recover. Many have declined by 90%, from sharks and tunas to swordfish and squid. We've become so skilled at finding, capturing, and marketing ocean wildlife on a mega scale that the natural flow of energy in the sea has been significantly disrupted. To address climate change and biodiversity loss, it is vital that we look at improved methods for agriculture on the land and wiser food choices from the land and the sea if we are to have a prosperous future for ourselves. Modern fishing has another catch: the use of plastics and other synthetic materials, the lines and nets that continue to catch and kill, adding to the decline of ocean wildlife, compounding the disruption of the ocean's chemistry. Countries around the world are embracing nature-based solutions to address the steep decline of wildlife on the land and in the sea. Protection works. Today, there are more whales than when I was a child, because nations agreed to stop killing them commercially in 1986. As a result, more carbon stays in the ocean and less is contributed to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and methane, as happens when whales are removed from the ocean. And if fish and other wildlife stayed in the sea, more carbon would stay there too. There are more sea turtles today than when I was a child because people globally have begun to value them more alive than as something to eat. 70 countries have now committed, and more are coming, to support safeguarding at least 30% of their land and 30% of the ocean by 2030, including at least 30% of the high seas, the vast global commons beyond the jurisdiction of coastal nations. Protection currently exists for about 15% of the land and only about 3% of the ocean globally, less than was hoped for by 2020, but certainly achievable by 2030 if current commitments stay on track and more join in the effort. Some nations have already committed more. 40% of the coastal waters of Chile have been protected. And some island countries, notably Palau and the Seychelles, have taken action that exceeds what most other nations are doing to give back to the ocean with thoughtful, meaningful rationale. That is, if the ocean is in trouble, so are we. The climate is in trouble if the ocean is in trouble. Taking care of the ocean means taking care of the future of humankind. Now we know. Never before could we know the magnitude of the impact we have had and are having on the natural systems that make our existence possible. Never again will there be a better opportunity to use the power of knowledge, our superpower, knowing. We know that we must make peace with nature if we are to achieve an enduring future for humankind within the natural living systems that make our existence possible.